If you would, find a Bible, open it up to Job. We're going to be in chapter 1 this morning. And as you go there, I have a story that I found from the internet. The internet's full of just great and ingenious stories. Some of them good, some of them. Anyway, the photographer for a national magazine was assigned to get photos of a great forest fire. Smoke at the scene hampered him, and he asked his home office to hire a plane. Arrangements were made, and he was told to go at once to a nearby airport where the plane would be waiting. When he arrived at the airport, the plane was warming up near the runway. He jumped in with his equipment and yelled, "Let's go, let's go!" Pilots swung the plane into the wind, and they were soon in the air. "Fly over the north side of the fire," yelled the photographer, "and make 3 or 4 low-level passes." "Why?" asked the pilot. "Because I'm going to take pictures," cried the photographer. "I'm a photographer, and photographers take pictures." After a long pause, the pilot said, "You mean you're not the instructor?" As one might expect, these two are just now entering into what might be a bad day. And the focus of our story this morning in Job is about Job and the first of a couple bad days that he's going to have. We're going to focus on one of them this morning. The goal of the story is to kind of get an understanding about how Job reacted in this situation. We're going to look closely at, after his bad day, how he reacted, and see if there are similarities and how we might be able to incorporate and get an understanding of how to respond to such a bad day from Job's example as recorded in chapter 1. So what I'd like to do first is read Job chapter 1, verses 6 through 12. It says, "One day the angels came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came with them. The Lord said to Satan, 'Where have you come from?' Satan answered the Lord, 'From roaming through the earth and going back and forth in it.' Then the Lord said to Satan, 'Have you considered my servant Job? There is no one on earth like him. He is blameless and upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil.' Does Job fear God for nothing?" Satan replied. "Have you not put a hedge around him and his household and everything he has? You have blessed the work of his hands, so that his flocks and herds are spread throughout the land. But stretch out your hand and strike everything he has, and he will surely curse you to your face." The Lord said to Satan, "Very well then, everything he has is in your hands, but on the man himself, do not lay a finger." I want to pull a couple of points from this conversation between the Lord and Satan. First, Job was set up in this passage to be a righteous man. He's a follower of God. In verse 8 it says, "Then the Lord said to Satan, 'Have you considered my servant Job? There is no one on earth like him. He is blameless and upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil.'" That's pretty high praise, I would think, coming from God himself. This is God talking to Satan, and he paints a picture of Job of just being a righteous individual, someone who turns away from evil in all situations, someone who is following God all the time, every single day. And I think it's cool. I just think it's neat that God says this about Job. He just paints the picture of him and who he is and how his heart is leaning toward the Lord. So I think because of what God has to say about Job, we might take from Job's experiences some examples about how we might be able to do things in our own lives. So just as God held Job up as an example to Satan, we're going to look at him a little bit as an example today about how to react, how to live a life that's focused on God. And I also believe that as followers of Jesus, we can learn something from Job's story. I think that it's important that as a body of believers, we learn from examples like Job, and we learn from each other as well. All of us in this room, as we follow Christ and as we try to grow in our faith and we try to grow to understand, we have our own days of triumph, we have our own days of tribulation, we have our own times of storm and times of calm. So I think just as Job's story was shared here, I would encourage the sharing of stories amongst ourselves, to get an understanding from each other about how to live for God in today's world. Job lived thousands of years ago. His example, as you're going to see in a few minutes, stands true today. But there are people going through the same types of situations that Job went through in today's environment. With all of the issues today, no cars in Job's time, we have cars now. No air conditioning in Job's time, we have air conditioning. So I think it's just as important as we learn from Job to share each other's stories. The second point from this passage I want to point out is that Satan can do nothing without God's permission. Take a look at verse 12. It says, "The Lord said to Satan, 'Very well then, everything he has is in your hands.'" Satan knew that he couldn't touch Job because he probably would have tried. Think about it. There's somebody on earth living a righteous life and Satan's having to stay away. That doesn't sound very much like Satan. But verse 12 makes clear that God hadn't given Satan permission to do anything to Job up until this point. So Satan, in essence, had to make a case, if you look at the verses before, saying things about, well, Job had a great life. You've been blessing everything that he does up until this point. So God had to turn everything over to Satan. God had to give Satan permission to do anything to Job. So it's probably one of the clearer foreshadowing moments of the passage that, great, okay, God has turned everything Job has over to Satan. That's probably not good news for Job. Third point I want to make from this particular section, God's permission is limited. Look at the second half of verse 12. It says, "The Lord said to Satan, 'But on the man himself do not lay a finger.'" I'm pretty sure Satan got the message loud and clear. God didn't have to repeat himself. Doesn't show that he repeated himself in this particular story. Satan knew the boundary and didn't dare cross it. So God has to give permission for Satan to work, and he gives that permission in a limited way. I think that can help us. If we're looking at a situation that's just, a tribulation in our lives, we recognize there is a limit. If you think Satan's working in that situation and you think it's just piling up against you, realize that God put a limit on you. And although you may think that it's more than you can handle, in God's eyes, it's probably not more than you. It's going to seem like a lot. It's going to seem heavy. It's going to seem like a tribulation. But if God puts limits, I'm pretty sure there are going to be limits that you can live with, that you'll be able to come through on the other side of that tribulation.